Watching News Now, and I'm Nivedna Prabhu. Let's begin with our top focus. The Indian Rice Exporters Federation has weighed in on the recent 50% tariffs imposed by the US on Indian goods. Now, they say these tariffs will largely impact American consumers, while Indian exporters remain relatively insulated from the effects. Despite the higher tariffs, demand from US consumers remains strong. Now, this sustained demand is expected to help Indian exporters benefit once prices stabilize in the market. In fact, to talk to us more on that front, being joined in by our guest this evening, let me take the opportunity to introduce him. Garg, Vice President, the Indian Rice Exporters Federation and Director, Sri Lal Mahal Group. Dev, thank you very much for taking the time out and joining us here this evening on ET Now, on News Now to be specific. Let me begin with the fact that, of course, the tariff shock in itself for India has been a hard blow. But from your vantage point and currently looking at how this is panning out, tell us more.
Look, as we stand today, as of yesterday, Indian goods, including rice, is subject to 50% tariff on export to the United States market. Before start of the tariff situation, this tariff rate stood at 10%. However, there is an increase of 40%. The US is a very major market for Indian rice, wherein the US is annually importing about 250,000 metric tons of rice, valued at approximately 3,100 crores. And this year, so far, we have only exported about 50% of that quantity. So there is still a lot of gap to be left. However, there is a broad consensus in the industry that we have seen such situations in the past. In the past, countries like Nigeria, Kenya have overnight increased massive tariffs on food imports. But we have seen that it is the consumer who bears the brunt of all these tariffs, because in the case of food, they only import what they need. They do not do any favors by importing any rice or any other goods from India. So the US consumer who consumes this rice or any other Indian product will have to pay this higher cost because they do not move their food habits so quickly. So recently, as soon as these tariffs were imposed, immediately everybody started pushing as many shipments in the market as much as possible. And we have seen that a basmati rice bag, a 10-pound basmati rice bag, which was originally being sold for 17 USD per bag, has now been sold at...
My other question to you, Dev, given how this... Absolutely. Right. Because when we did know about the tariff deadline, right, and in the anticipation of that, continuation in what you were saying, what kind of shipment push actually took place in the weeks leading up to it?
Yes. About 1.5 months ago, there was a clear indication that this tariff situation could worsen. And once this announcement was made that the tariff, any shipment made by 27th of August will be subject to only 25% tariff. And this additional 25% penalty will not be applicable on it. So every exporter has pushed at least 3 months worth of goods in the last 1.5 months. So if we talk about numbers, last year we had exported 3,100 crores worth of goods to the United States market when we talk about rice. And so far, this number has already touched about 2,000 crores, and we still have a big part of the year left to be concluded. So in the coming months, we do not see any significant fall in India's export performance. And the export performance, which naturally dips during the festival season, that is December and January, till then, the exports are expected to remain steadfast. And the cost of all these American tariffs will be passed on to the consumers. The industry at large has already renegotiated the contracts. And most of this has already been passed to the domestic distributors who have already jacked up the prices in the domestic market in the United States, and the consumers are paying for it. In the long run, it is the exporter who will benefit from this, because as we have seen in the case of other countries, these tariffs, eventually there will be some rationalization. Some sense will come in, and all these tariffs at some point will have to be rationalized and to be reduced. However, once a benchmark is set in the international market and the United States consumer is willing to pay this higher price, then Indian rice will still continue to be sold at a higher price. We have seen this and many times. In other countries also we have seen this. When these tariffs are rolled back, it is a bumper and a windfall gain time for the exporter, because the prices in the retail prices in the market remains the same. and the exporter is able to command a higher margin. So the industry at large is not very worried about this situation because currently
Interesting
there was
point that you make, Dev, because, in a nutshell, if it's the American consumers that are the ones that who are absorbing the higher costs, and like how you put that out, it does suggest in a sense that India's exporters can continue business with it with limited disruption, that is. But, when you talk in the global sense, agri-commodities like rice, price is one element, but consumer habits and supply chains is also playing a role. So what I want to understand from you at this point is what dynamics do you see shaping the impact of this particular tariff?
as we have seen already in our IREF, we have more than 7,500 exporters who regularly export rice to major markets, including USA. Most of these exporters have already renegotiated their contracts. Most of this 50% tariff, as we have seen that there is an increase of 40%. Originally, before start of this situation, the tariff was 10%. So after start of all these issues, there is an increase of 40%. So out of this 40%, more than 30% to 35% cost has already been passed on in renegotiated contracts, and the Indian consumer has the Indian exporter has very easily absorbed 5 to 10% of impact on its own. So as the industry stands today, there is a lot of hue and cry everywhere, but practically on ground, the situation remains the same. There is not much disruption in trade, and that will be displayed in the numbers coming forth. This year, in spite of the situation, I'm very confident that we will make more exports to the United States market than we did last year, because there is an increasing demand of basmati rice. And even
that is actually, as you're talking about that.
Yes.
All right. So there is a demand for that. And taking, the point earlier that you made, that when you saw that deadline, there was at least 3 months worth of goods that was pushed out. So when we're talking about this festive season and in the larger scheme of things, Dev, looking ahead to, let's say, the November to February window, what patterns do you expect in shipment volumes from here? And in the larger picture, how are we, in a sense of purview, putting that into context?
Yes. So this year, we are staring at a record bumper crop in India. So in the coming season, we anticipate a surplus stock of more than 29 million metric tons. So going into September, October, and November, when the fresh crop in India comes, we anticipate to be a deflationary effect on prices, and domestic prices in India will definitely come down because we have such a large surplus of stocks available with us. So when the prices will naturally come down little bit will be absorbed by the exporter, and most of it will be passed on to the American consumer. So even when we look at the horizon in after the festival season in February, March, and April, I do not feel there is a strong expectation that the export volume will continue to remain the same, because the food habits do not change overnight. People in the United States market have become habitual of eating not just the native population or the people from the subcontinent, even everybody, even modern fusion foods. Everybody is eating basmati rice. So there is a huge demand in the market. And even if we talk about rice prices, the prices as compared to other food items that are consumed, the prices are still very low, and it constitutes a very small percentage of the food budget of any family in the US market. So even going into the next year, we do not anticipate these figures to fall, and we still expect that we will do more exports of rice to the US than we did this last year. And this year, our expectation is that these export volumes will touch around 275,000 metric ton, and the value of exports will go up from 3,100 crores to around 3,500 crores.
So it is safe to say, Dev, while you talk about those numbers as well, that we will not see that bigger disruption. But let me ask you this, beyond the US and the immediate tariff shock, do you see, this particular moment that could shape longer term strategies for Indian rice exporters, whether we're talking about in pricing, positioning, or in market diversification itself? Because we do understand when you look at this overall, right, with the recent delegation that had also visited India from the Philippines, which had indicated that stronger food import push. And the numbers also, we understand, is staggering. So how significant could that market be compared to the US? Does the diversification lessen the risk of tariff shocks? In a sense, overall, what is your purview of the same?
Look, this is a pivot point for Indian exports. Sometimes you need a wake-up call to wake up from your sleep. So this was that wake-up call. So when we talk about Philippines, as you already know that a high-level delegation from the Philippines just came to India. Philippines is importing 2.3 million tons of rice every year. This is 9 times more than the US market, which is a very significant gap. Currently, a lot of Philippine imports are coming from China. Philippines as a country has decided to move away from China and increase trade with India. So when this delegation had come in, so we have even agreed that Philippines will increase food imports from India, and definitely I am 100% sure that the additional demand that will come from Philippines will be much more than what, even if we end up losing something, even though we will not lose any sales in the US, but any additional sales to the Philippines will be much more than what we currently supply to the entire US market. For this, the Ministry of Commerce, Government of India has recently organized the inaugural session of the Bharat International Rice Conference at Pragati Maidan.
Right, Dave, I'd have to interject you there because I'm afraid we're running short of time, but you make that very imperative point that this is perhaps that wake-up call is needed. But like you did mention, that has been navigated in a sense as to what the roadmap also looks like. But for the moment, Dave, thank you very much for joining us here this evening on ET Now.
Thank you.
But for now, we leave the conversation.